Okay. Welcome back, everyone, to our Gate of Trust series. And I'm going to do a review, which may take a few minutes because we're reviewing 148 pages. But I'm going to do a synopsis of that just to refresh ourselves and get us back into the spirit. And all of the previous classes you can get on YouTube. And if you need help with that, let me know. I will try and remember to send out the link to the series of all of the videos. The key, I think the key point to the entire idea of studying the Gate of Trust, and one of the enormous benefits is that in order for us to function as productively as possible, we need to be able to, number one, willing to, that's number one, and then number two, able to, which is number two. Sometimes we're willing to, but we're unable to. Sometimes we're able to, but we're unwilling to. So the first thing is we have to be willing. And once we're willing, then we can always, once someone is willing, as our sages say, there's nothing that stands in the way of will, right? If there's a will, there's a way, as we say in English. In Hebrew, there's a ein davar ha'omed b'fnei haratzon. Nothing stands before one's will. So when someone wills something, that they can achieve it, and they will find the way to. We have inherently, as human beings, we have handicaps, and these handicaps are sort of just part of being human. And if we can identify, if we are willing to identify, and then we have the means to identify the handicaps, then, and we can get them out of the way, we can function on a far more advanced level than the average person does. And we have a lot of handicaps. We have a tendency of not seeing things as they are. We have a very, very strong tendency of not seeing things as they are. Most of that comes from our need to justify and defend ourselves, which we have a very desperate need to do because we feel very vulnerable and threatened. Specifically, our ego feels that way. And just the ability to acknowledge that and know how vulnerable and threatened we are is itself already an awareness of this handicap. And the reason why I'm saying this is because the whole idea of the Gate of Trust of this entire book is for us to look at things in a very real and honest way. And that will always mean that we are going to threaten our current existence. Or let me say this, we're going to threaten our current way of existing. Not our current existence, but we'll threaten our current way of existing. And so we have to be willing to look at our life, ourselves, reality, and consider that it is different than the way it appears to be, than the way we insist on it being, etc. And as the Rebbe writes in many letters to people, the willingness, and actually in a specific letter, and some of you may have heard me mention this, most of my thoughts nowadays are publicized. So as some of you know. So there's a really beautiful letter I came across where the Rebbe writes about his experience in the University of Berlin and in universities in France, the university in France where he was. I think that was Sorbonne. And his observation was that many professors who were trained, and the Rebbe was trained in, as he describes it, the exact sciences. You know, science does have a way of precisely, that's what science is about measuring things and being precise about things. So that these people were trained in a very particular methodology of thinking, and they even taught this. And yet he said it was very clear that when they had their own challenges in their own personal life, the Rebbe made two very critical observations. He said, number one, was it was very clear that they were unable to use their own scientific methodologies to approach the issue they were dealing with. And hopefully we all understand why, because this is the human handicap, and that is that we personalize things, and then we lose complete objectivity, or the ability to look at something scientifically, objectively, honestly, as to the way it is, but we begin to observe it as to the way we experience it. And the Rebbe added a second point, which is even, in my opinion, more important than the first point, in that not only were they not able to look at their own life issues objectively, but they actually believed that they were looking at them objectively while they were looking at them very subjectively. So that means, and the critical point of the second element is that, it's one thing for me to know I'm subjective. Yes, I'm being subjective. I can't, it's too emotional for me and I'm being subjective. But the moment a person thinks that they're being objective in subjectivity, that is like a person who is sick, and one person can say, I know I'm sick, but I'm scared of doctors, I'm not going to the doctor, which happens quite often. But there are other people who say, I'm not sick. They're in complete denial. And if you're in complete denial, then you're not even acknowledging that there's a handicap. If you don't acknowledge there's a handicap, obviously you can't address it. So all of this is very critical in us approaching the gate of trust, because my hope is that it does threaten you. It does challenge you, is really the real word I would like to say. But if you permit it to challenge you heavily, then you'll even feel threatened sometimes, and you'll immediately reject different ideas, and then hopefully with some time you'll begin to embrace those ideas, because you come to the realization, I'm really threatened by this. And as the Rebbe writes in that particular letter about the professors, that the reason why they were unable to be honest and convince themselves they were being honest in their dishonesty is because the Rebbe suggests a few reasons. One of them is they were unwilling to make the changes to their lifestyle that were required based on the feedback of what they were experiencing in their personal lives, which needed a shift and a change. Now, hopefully all of us can see, if we go back in our lives to things that we feel safe enough to acknowledge, where we behaved a certain way and that behavior led to certain things. And then we say, yeah, I treated my spouse a certain way, my kids a certain way, and I've learned with time, that's not the right way, and that actually is counterproductive, or I was just being defensive, or whatever it may be. That's exactly what we're talking about. And so the gate of trust is really looking at reality as reality is, not as we perceive it, and giving us the gift of beginning to see things that way. And so as a somewhat of a summary of everything that we've studied until page 148, and again, I just want to share, if you don't have this book, this is the book that we are using. I know it shows up reverse in the video, but if you don't know which book we're using, just send me an email and I will send you the link to buy the book, so you can follow along, because it is a text-based class. The difference, there's a very big difference between, the first thing we learned is that there's a very big difference between trusting in God and having faith in God, or believing in God. Believing in God is somewhat passive. It doesn't call upon a person to do anything. You don't have to do something. You just, I believe there's a God. And that's why if you go into the street and you ask most people if they believe in God, most Americans at least do believe that there is a God, and that shows up hardly anywhere in their life. In other words, you will see very little implication of their belief in God showing up in their life. They still live very much and make decisions very much as a person who doesn't believe there's a God. And as we study more and more of this, we'll see how our decisions in life are very different when we believe in God. So when we trust in God, trusting in God is active; it's not passive. So when a person trusts in God, they literally put their affairs in the hands of God. They are actually a calmer person, which is one of the main benefits of trusting in God, is that we are actually more calm than an average person, because we actually do trust that God has my best interest in mind and is carrying me, and it's not me who's carrying myself. And trust, the pure trust, that means absolute trust, shows up specifically when there is nothing else for us to rely on. As long as we have other things to rely on, then we may not be having full trust in God. Complete trust in God, which by the way is very, very rare. That's like the elite of the elite of the Jewish people, and we may refer to them as a tzaddik, has complete absolute trust. Yet we need to know the ideal, so we work in that direction, and that is that when there's no hope, right? There's no possibility in the world as we know it for there to be salvation for me. There's no doctor that has any remedy that knows of how they can help me, etc., etc. It's at that moment that there's no straw to grab. The person's drowning. When there's a straw and someone's drowning, they will grab that, even though it's ridiculous. Like, what's the straw going to do? You're just going to schlep that right down with you. But there's always the hope that this will save me, this will save me. When there's no straw, that is when the purest opportunity of trust shows up. That's a very, very advanced level of trust, but that's the ideal that we're working towards. So we have to know that. And trust is really built on a real solid relationship with God. And honestly, we may not have a single relationship like that in our life. Never mind with God, with another person. I mean, to trust someone, there are reasons why we are unable to trust someone in the same level we trust God, as we're going to review in just a few minutes. But to be able to trust on that level is very, very advanced, and that's what we want to work towards. We also discussed how God shows up in two ways in our life. And this is a very, very good simplification, but true simplification of God, of our experience of God in life. There is God showing up in a revealed way, and there's God showing up in a hidden way. Those are the only two ways God shows up, revealed or hidden, which means that God is always fully present. God is here with me now 100%. Is God here in a revealed state? Depends on my consciousness. The more conscious I am of God, the more revealed God is. The less conscious I am of God, the less revealed God is. When we go through our life and things are functioning in their natural order, natural way, right? So nature hides God. Oh, that's natural. That's normal, right? Of course I woke up today. I woke up yesterday, and I wake up every day. Of course I'm feeling good. Why should I feel sick, right? That's just nature, trusting nature. The sun rose today. Of course it rose. Right? You thought it wasn't going to rise, right? So that's nature, and that's God simply in a hidden state. It's God doing everything, God giving me help, God having the sun rise, but God in a hidden state. And then there's God in a revealed state, and that is where we see God. And that's what we would call a miracle, or when we actually develop and train ourselves to begin to see that everything is a miracle. And that, wow, I can actually feel genuine gratitude that I woke up today. Or I can see how God orchestrated something, because God gifted me today in seeing how something unusual happened. And I can actually see the hand of God and celebrate God in a revealed state. And then and really what we're doing is, what we're really talking about is raising our level of consciousness, God consciousness. The more I become aware of God in my regular life, the more God conscious I am becoming. And this is a lifelong process, which we work on to become more and more and more God conscious. The more God conscious we are, the more the easier it becomes to trust in God, and the more beautiful our life becomes in every single way. And this is something that's really important. Like, if only everyone understood that actually a relationship with God is the very best thing we can do to enhance our life. Everything that everyone's running around and chasing today, and people are spending hundreds and thousands of hours listening to podcasts to figure out how to be happy, how to be calm, how to be at peace. All of that, actually, the only true. There are many hacks that will help you temporarily, right? if you go on the beach and you close your eyes and you meditate for 15 minutes, you probably will feel more calm than you did before, right? But it's 15 minutes and then you're back to reality, or the reality as we perceive it, right? But when we actually develop our relationship with God, we are carrying something that stays with us and works wherever we go. And that means all of the things that we believe that we need to be happy, we actually no longer even need those things. All we need is God. And this sounds like very radical and religious and all of that, but actually it's not radical religion or anything. It's just talking about developing a relationship with the source of everything, who loves us infinitely and unconditionally and has the means to and the desire to give us and give us and give us. And that's what trusting is, trusting all of those points. And so we discussed that there are actually seven qualifications for a being to have in order for us to actually put our absolute trust in them. And what are those seven things? So number one is that they need to possess compassion. You cannot put your trust in someone that does not have compassion. I hope that's self-understood, and that's just simply, if someone doesn't have compassion, empathy, and love, they don't, in English, care. If a person doesn't care about me, then how can I trust them? They don't care. And care is expressed through compassion, empathy, and love. Right? How much compassion, empathy, and love do you have? Who do you have it most for? Right? We probably all have the same answers to those questions, right? Children, grandchildren, spouse, parents, whatever it may be. It probably varies for each person, but right, those are the people we have the greatest compassion, empathy, and love for. And yet we know that sometimes we fall out of compassion, empathy, and love for those people. So it's not absolute. So we can't then put our full trust in them, because hey, if they're having a bad day, or if I'm having a bad day, they can't put their trust in me. I'm in a bad mood, so I'm going to be nasty to them. Well, that's unreliable. You can't trust that, right? You can't trust it absolutely, right? And that's the way we all are to some extent. So hopefully we're overall, for the most part, trustworthy, except for our bad moods or whatever other issues we deal with. But that point number one is the being that we want to trust implicitly has to care. Number two is they have to be attentive to all our matters. That means they're aware of everything that's going on with us, which no one is, other than God. They can overcome any obstacle that's in the way. Any obstacle, any. That means that if someone has an illness and there's no doctor in the world, and every doctor, we go to the 10 experts in this field, and they all say, you got 2 weeks, right? Well, there's no one that can help other than God, who can overcome any obstacle. So we have care, attentiveness, can overcome any obstacle. Number four, knows what will be of true benefit. Right? Imagine someone's trying to help me, but they don't really know what's good for me. Or they think they know what's good for me. Then we find out it was a mistake. You ever have that story in your life? Someone tried to help you, and then they apologized. They meant well, but they didn't really know. They thought they knew, which is not their fault necessarily, but that's the case. And then number five, he has always taken care of me. This has to be a being that not only will take care of me, it has always taken care of me. Why isn't it enough for them to just begin taking care of me from now on? Why do I have to trust that they always took care of me? Why does it have to be that they always took care of me for me to trust them? Because someone that I trust absolutely is someone that is always there for me. And always means that they always were there for me. If they weren't always there for me until now, that means that their care for me is not 100%. So when we begin to notice how God has taken care of us until today, and only God has done that, we've breathed, right? I always like making that calculation. Just figure out how many years and days you've lived. And then you can Google how many breaths a person takes per day on average, depending on your heart rate. But you'll be able to just put in perspective what God does for us. And then he's the only one who has jurisdiction over us. God's the only being that has full jurisdiction over us. And lastly, God is generous and kind to undeserving as well as deserving. The last one is a very critical one, that God gives to us even when we are undeserving. Sorry, it's not the way they taught it to you. They told you that God only gives you if you behave. Not true. God gives to everyone. Proof is how much God gives you. With all due respect to me and you, right? The fact that we have so much is the very first sign that God gives to the undeserving. We are definitely not perfect servants of God, if you will, or we are not perfectly dedicated to God for sure. So the fact that God gives us so abundantly is very clear that God gives to the undeserving as well as to the deserving. So those are the 7 conditions which only God has. We discussed that God also knows if our trust is genuine or lip service. So something I've spoken about in the past, I always feel is very important because this is a big handicap that we have. That very often we approach the gate of trust with an agenda. The agenda is, I heard that if I trust in God, then God will give me everything that I want. Right? You hear the agenda? So am I coming to, do I want to trust in God or do I want everything that I want? If I'm doing A to get B, my agenda is B. It's very, very important to always notice within ourselves. Right? Why do I want this? If it's to get me here, this is what I want. I don't want this. I want this, but I need this to get here. Right? I am very, very nice to the secretary, and I bring her flowers once a week for one reason, so that I can get to the boss. The second I get to the boss and the deal's done, I could care less about the secretary. But it looks like I care so much about the secretary, right? That's the idea. So the idea is that God doesn't want, God is not seeking lip service, he's seeking something genuine. And genuine means the way we practice being genuine, at least the way I understand to practice being genuine practically, is that to ask myself when things are not going exactly the way I want to go, whether I am now rejecting God or I'm still with God, and say, God, I know you got some plan here which I can't relate to. It's really tough on me. I'm not really enjoying this at all, but I'm with God. I'm with you, God. I'm on your platform. That's how we can practice not seeking a particular outcome, but seeking a relationship with God. Another thing that's very critical also to test how pure our trust in God is that we are only trusting God. The moment I'm putting my trust in anyone or anything else, I am clearly not absolutely trusting God because I feel the need to rely on other things and other people. Whereas there's a beautiful story, I don't know if I shared this when we were going through this or earlier, but there's a beautiful story about a man who he had a very successful, I think it was a shoe business. He was a Holocaust survivor, actually, and he had a very successful shoe business. And he would come to the synagogue every single night, to the shul, and he would talk between Mincha and Ma'ariv, the 2 services we have in the evening. And he would always speak about trust in God. He would give a class like on Shaar Habitachon, trust in God. And there was one guy in the synagogue that was very, very cynical of this man teaching. Why? He said, your life is good. You survived the Holocaust. You have a family. You have a thriving business. You're doing fabulously well. And you come and tell everyone how to trust in God. Right? Anyone can talk about trusting in God that way. One day, this man's factory had a fire, and everything he had basically burned to the ground. The next day, the man comes to the synagogue, and he comes to his class, and he teaches his class without skipping a beat. A smile. The man looks like nothing happened to him, and he's teaching about trusting God. So suddenly the cynic is like, wow, I cannot believe this. This guy actually was for real all of these years. but he doesn't understand it. Like, how can he have such how can he be in such a disposition after having lost his business? So he asks he goes over to the man afterwards and says, I have to be honest with you, I was cynical all these years, but here I see you standing up with such joy. How do you do that? So he said, there is a law in the code of Jewish law that when a person, there are certain times during the prayer service that we are supposed to stand. You know, you're in shul, right? High holidays, please rise. Everyone, please rise. Page whatever, right? There are certain times that we stand, certain times that we sit. That's not only to make sure you don't fall asleep, by the way, but that's actually because certain prayers are holier, and we rise for those prayers. So the most classic prayer that we stand for is actually called standing, the Amida. You ever hear the word the prayer Amida, otherwise known as the Shemona Esrei? Amida means to stand, because we stand during that prayer. That's the primary, the highest point of the prayer. So the question, because in Jewish law we analyze everything very precisely. So the question is, when is a person considered to be standing, and when is a person considered not to be standing? You say, well, what's the question? It's very obvious. We know when someone's standing, right? Well, what happens if someone is standing but they're leaning on the table, right? So is that standing or not? So the Jewish law determines that if a person is leaning on something when they're standing, to the extent that if you were to take away what they're leaning on, they would fall, then they're not considered to be standing, right? Very logical. But if they're leaning on something, but not with such weight that if you were to take the table away that they're leaning on, right, they would not fall, then they're still considered to be standing. Simple, right? So this man tells the cynic, this businessman who lost everything, tells the cynic that no matter what goes on in my life, I only lean on God. That has always been my policy. I have a million rubles in the bank, a million shekels in the bank. That's beautiful. Thank you, God, for that. I will try and use it the way God wants me to, but I don't lean on it as security. My only security is God. My factory burned down, I still got God. God's my security. So that's exactly the point that we're talking about. That we rely only on God. We don't rely on anyone else. Another key point is, how do we know? And here's a real handicap, okay? And can be very threatening. So I give you that warning. That how do we know that we're relying on God? One of the critical ways to know we're relying on God is if we actually trust what God tells us to do. If we trust what God tells us to do. Now, I'm not suggesting that right after this class you're going to be the perfect expression of God's will, and everything that God tells the Jewish people to do, you're going to be a perfect expression of, right? Nor will I, right? However, the two grow together. So if I truly trust in God, then when God says that I should be doing a certain thing, then I at least pay attention to it and try and incorporate it into my life, or make it the next thing that I will incorporate into my life. But to live a life which is not aligned with the will of God, while at the same time saying I trust in God, is not honest. It's just not honest. And so there needs to be a wholesomeness in our relationship with God. And another very critical point that we learned is that God set up, for better or for worse, ultimately it's for better, even though it feels for worse, that a human being in this world must put forth significant effort in order to do what they are meant to do in this world. This is not an easy one to swallow, but it remains very, very true. The reason why why didn't God, God, you put us here for a purpose, give me everything I need, make sure my bank account is always full, that there's food that's always available, that I have good health, and I'll do what you want. God says, no. I could have done that, but I deliberately didn't do that. I deliberately made it, set things up so that would require effort on your part. Of course, that effort is a test. It's to see if you will pursue what I tell you to do, and if you in fact trust me. And that brings out the trust within a person. That brings out the trust within a person. Sometimes it's a gift when you don't impose, when you give you put the responsibility in the other person's court to awaken within themselves this character. And that's what God does. And that's why life is not easy. And a second reason we discuss is because work keeps man out of trouble. That's the reason why it's very important to constantly be productive. That's why retirement becomes very problematic for many people. There's a Mishnah that teaches us that free time leads to immorality, is what the Mishnah is. This is in Ethics of Our Fathers. Free time leads to immorality. One of the best ways to keep a man out of trouble is to make sure he's very busy. Simple. And when I say busy, I mean productively. To be doing things which are constantly productive. And that's true. When I say man, I meant man as in the male, but I also mean women too, right? That's true for every person, every human being. Constantly be productive. Always have a little bit more than you can handle on your plate, right? And the only reason why you have vacation and free time is so that you can re-energize for all of those things that you're busy with. Now, there are circumstances where a person demonstrates, and this is very rare, by the way, but we find this by very rare, unique people, that when someone has demonstrated that they have absolute trust in God, and that they are no longer tested, and they no longer need to be tested by the challenges of life because they have risen above them, and they stay completely away from anything God doesn't want, that God actually blesses them with the freedom to be supplied with everything that they need and to be able to just spend their time in the service of God. That's very rare. Don't expect that to happen in your life at all, but that does happen to certain rare people. We also discussed, which I think I'm not going to review now because this is really taking us some time, why the righteous suffer. Unless you want me to, then I will review the reasons why. So we discussed in this book 5 reasons why righteous people suffer. That's one of the greatest questions that people have. Why do righteous people suffer? There are a good number of reasons why. Why do the wicked prosper? We also discussed 5 reasons why God will have the wicked prosper. And and all this is important to remember so that when we see what we would consider to be an injustice, we have to understand that there's a far greater picture than we actually see. One of the reasons, by the way, that we discussed that the righteous suffer is to teach others who watch them and learn from them how to deal with anything that God sends your way. And a righteous person, when they suffer, they handle that with the highest level of dignity because they carry it in the perspective of trust in God. That this is what God wants me to deal with, so this is what I'm going to deal with. And that inspires many other people. And God will give prosperity to a wicked person because God says, I'm going to give you a reward in this world so that in the next world you're not going to have a reward which is far greater than we experience in this world. We also discussed the type of occupation one should choose. And then and now we're in the middle of chapter 4, and let me just review some of the main points we made in the beginning of the first half of chapter 4, which we're in the middle of now. So we discussed that there are different areas of life where we need to have trust. And I'm just doing some very general points here. We discussed in a word which you may have heard. It's a word that's a little bit more commonly used word called hishtadlut, or in the Ashkenazic terminology, hishtadlus, which is a person's personal effort. Right? Can a person sit back and put their hands in the pocket and say, I trust in God? God, I'm waiting for the paycheck to show up in the mail. Right? So there are two ways of answering that question. One person will say, of course not. You think if you put your hands in your pocket, the check's going to show up in the mail, right? Where is that statement coming from? That just comes from the belief that a person has to work. That's really what produces money, right? That's one way of looking at it. That's not the way we're looking at it. Actually, all of our money does come from God. And the paycheck we get comes by way of some means of a job that we have, but it's really coming from God. However, because God specifically wants us to engage with this world, God says, I am giving you the responsibility of putting forth effort through which I will send you the blessings that I will send you. So everything comes from God, but it comes through different means. And God says, I want you to create those means. That's the reason why we go to work every day, so to speak. That's why the reason why we do different things that we do. That's why we have to exercise to take care of our health, and we have to eat appropriately to take care of our health. All of that is because God says, I'm giving you the responsibility through natural means to do what you're meant to do, and then I will bless you. Unfortunately, you can read every single day a story about a guy who exercises for 45 minutes every single day, and he only drinks green juices and eats the healthiest vegetables and whatever else is someone might consider to be the healthiest diet. And they wake up at the age of 28 and they find out that they have a devastating disease, God forbid. Right? What happened? Right? And the storyline always is in the news is the shock of that. Like, right? What happened? And the answer is that we don't actually determine whether we're going to be healthy or not. We do have a responsibility to set up a structure that is in the nature that God created is suitable for health. That's our responsibility. And then God provides us with health. And sometimes God doesn't for whatever reasons, which is why bad things happen to good people. That was a question we asked earlier. And they happen. That only happens because we don't control our health. But when we do what God tells us to do, so then the blessing of health comes to us in a much greater fashion. I'm going to add another point I made at some point in our many classes last year, that just so we have a wholesome picture of how to look at things. A person has a destined number of days that they are going to live, in hours, minutes, and seconds that a person is going to live. And that has been decided by God before a person is born. So other than very extreme situations, we don't die preemptively. We don't die early. We can't extend our lifespan. But we can enhance the quality of life that we have based on the choices that we make. That we can do. And that is exactly the point that we're making here. Whether a person is going to, God forbid, wake up and find out that they have a terminal illness or not is most often not in our hands. But what is in our hands is the way we are living the days that we have. And that's why exercise is important. And that's why eating properly is important. And keeping our stress to a minimum is important. Because all of those things are the natural methods of health. And then through that, God sends us health. So we're not talking about causing ourselves to die, because we can't really do that for the most part, but we can impact significantly the way we experience life. That makes sense? Maybe a drastic change from the way we're used to looking at things? Okay, think about it. A lot of people blame themselves for all different types of things. I just want to let you know you're not so powerful, and you don't get to decide how long you live. But you are powerful enough that you can impact the way you live, the quality of life. And that's very, very significant, as we know, right? Very, very significant. So that's why food and health is very important. Livelihood, by the way, you can find people who are very, very talented, and for some reason they just can't, their business efforts never really work out. And then you have some guy who knows nothing and he strikes gold. He just starts running with something. The guy he's all over the place, doesn't know anything about anything in marketing, finance, doesn't know anything. And this guy's just wildly successful. And all of that is because our success and failures in livelihood ultimately are God's. We have to do our best in nature to develop a healthy business, but the success of it, again, is all from God. So we need to do marketing. We need to think about how to invest the money and all of those things. Those are all the natural means. But those are all because it is through these channels that God sends his blessing. And this is the big challenge of carrying two things at once. Me putting forth effort, and yet still knowing that my effort does not create the success, but it is God who gives me the success. That is very, very hard for us to wrap our minds around, because when we put forth effort in something, we begin to believe in the effort we're putting forth, as opposed to believing in God. That's the big challenge. There's a very big test of wealth, which God should bless all of us with. May God bless all of us with the test of wealth, and may we all successfully pass it. It's a very, very big test. And God gives sustenance. Sometimes he gives sustenance to many through one. What does that mean? Sometimes God gives a king, which we don't really have nowadays, but God gives a king wealth, and that king then nourishes his country and gives people opportunity, right? Sometimes God gives a man a business where he has the ability to employ many, many people. And part of the reason why God's giving him the wealth is so that he can spread the wealth to all of these people, right? And we have to know why God gives a person wealth. Now, a person who does not trust in God and believes I made the money hoards the money out of fear that they're going to lose it. What happens to a person who actually trusts that God's the one who supplies me with my money? Are they ever concerned about parting with money? Not at all. Because my supplier has infinite, infinite worth, infinite resources, and continues to supply me. So there's nothing to worry about. Now, it doesn't mean, but our supplier does tell us, don't be reckless. Right? Don't be reckless. That doesn't mean you should just take all of your money and squander it or just give it away entirely, but be very generous to the way I guide you, as God guides us in the Torah about how to help other people with our money. And one of the most recent things we learned is that the reason why a person will do something that is unethical in their acquiring wealth is for one reason. We don't trust in God. We feel that we have to outsmart a system, and we believe that we are the ones who are making our money. A true man of God will never do something unethical. Always very important to remember. If you want to know how much you trust in God, ask yourself how much you feel you need to cheat in your taxes. Right? I could save $20,000. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't be smart with your taxes. You should be very, very smart and shrewd with your taxes. You should hire the best accountant you know who knows how to work the system. Right? When I say work the system, I don't mean cheat the system. I mean just that's smart business. Right? But cheating the system is clearly a person who does not trust in God. And so we confront ourselves. Maybe we know that, we're a little bit dishonest about certain things. I'm not talking about anything, blatant and whatever, but still it's a little bit dishonest, some gray areas. And this is where we challenge ourselves and say, why am I doing this? If God is allotting a certain amount of money that I'm going to make this year, do I really need to try and cut this to save $5,000? I'll get the $5,000. If it's meant to be in my pocket, it's going to be in my pocket. That's where we do the growth. It's when we apply it in our lives. We catch ourselves. We catch that we're being dishonest to what we believe, and saying, I'm letting go. I'm going to trust in God. I'm going to let go of that $5,000. That's trusting God, right? Another thing is, again, I mentioned earlier, is hoarding money is another sign that we don't trust that God's the one who's supplying us with the money. And here's another big one: is when we expect thanks from benefactors. That means what happens when we help someone? Someone's really in need. Let's say someone is really in need, right? And we help them. And they, for whatever reason, it's below their dignity to give you the appropriate thank you for helping them. Let's say that's the case. That's very often the case. People have their dignity, which in dignity I'm using as a glorified word for ego, and they have a very hard time acknowledging, right? So they don't give you the proper thank you. However, your money was well invested in someone who needs it, right? So do you get caught up in them not thanking me? Do they know? Do they realize what I did for them? Do they realize how much money I gave them? All of that is the belief that I am helping them, when really God just gave money to me so that I can actually use it to help that person. Right? Now, their thanks is their own ugliness. It's not my business. That's their business. But I took the money God gave me. God brought a certain situation to my attention. I took the money, the money God gave me, and I used it to help that situation. That's all. That's my business. God, I did what you asked me to do. I don't know, thank yous, not thank yous, whatever. That's their business and their character. But when we get all upset, I'm never going to help them again. They don't even know how to say thank you, right? That's all the belief that I am the one who's helping them. I'm just an agent. I'm just a funnel. Simply a funnel. You know what? Guess what? A lot less drama in life. You don't have this whole story about a guy you helped and they didn't even thank you. You come home, it's a whole thing, right? No, thank me, not thank me, whatever. That's their business, has nothing to do with me. I am grateful. Thank you, God, for giving me abundance so that I can do this for another person. Their family's being helped now, whatever. This is the game changer in who we are that comes right out of trust. Become different people. When we have this, when we are willing to acknowledge it's all from God. When we seek wealth for honor, that's also a big sign that we don't realize where our money is coming from. We always have to remember it's from God. What happens when the person has financial struggles? Where's that coming from? It's also coming from God. Keep it in perspective. Otherwise, you'll be sitting blaming this one, that one, the other one. When someone is fired from their job and it takes them a little while till they get another job and they're struggling, right? They can live in resentment of their boss. Right? That doesn't serve anyone any good. And it's dishonest. God doesn't want me to have a job right now. That's why I don't have a job. That's the only reason why. Because God loves me and God gives me everything I have. If I don't have it for some reason, which I probably won't know the reason for, God doesn't want me to have this job now, so I don't have it. And it just came through the boss. He decided to be the nasty one or the agent of negativity. That's his business, but it's not my business. I have no business with him. I only have business with God. And this changes our attitude in social interactions, and this is exactly where we're up to. So we have 10 minutes left for some text. I hope I didn't bore you with this long review, but I thought it was necessary. Any questions, by the way? Objections? Protests? We're good? Moving right along? Okay. We're on page 148, everyone. So the author now turns to discuss how a person is supposed to have bitachon regarding matters in the third category, matters that affect a person's social interactions. So, however, the explanation regarding the proper bitachon, the proper trust in the third category, which is comprised of those matters that pertain to his wife, children, members of his household, relatives, friends, enemies, people whom he holds in high esteem, acquaintances, as well as superiors and subordinates from different classes of people. The proper way to rely on God regarding them is as I will relate. So he breaks things down as he does through the whole book. He's very methodical and structured in the way he discusses things. So he says a person cannot escape from one of the following two scenarios. Either he will be estranged, living alone, or he will live amongst his family and close ones. So he says there are two general scenarios a person finds themselves in. And unfortunately, I hope that no one here knows of this, but loneliness, being alone in this world is not so uncommon. Sometimes, and I will say, I do want to say that we should also recognize the huge blessing of being a Jew, having Jewish values to the extent that we all do have Jewish values, and being part of the Jewish community. I think just the fact that you're taking this class already puts you as a part of a community, makes you a part of a community, puts us way ahead of most people in our social life. So many people in America really have no one to turn to when they have anything seriously going on in their life. And many, many people are estranged from most of their family tragically. Children from parents, parents from children, siblings, like it's a disaster, right? So that's a scenario, though. That's a reality. See, he says that there are some people who will be estranged, living alone. And then there are people who live amongst his family and close ones. So he begins by discussing people who are alone. I just want to begin this by telling you something that the Rebbe told, I think a few people, for sure, if not many. There was a woman who lost her husband, and she had a private audience with the Rebbe, and she told the Rebbe that she feels lonely. And the Rebbe's reaction to her was the reaction only a Rebbe can have, I think, in a very authentic way, because the Rebbe just reacted from the way he lives. And the Rebbe said, how can a Jew ever feel lonely? God is always with you. And when the Rebbe said it to someone, it meant something because he spoke from his true feeling and experience. Now imagine if we lived every day, right? We all know, human beings are social beings. Even an introvert, and even extreme introverts, if they're healthy and they're not a hermit, right, they thrive on social interaction to some extent, right? Even if it may be a little bit different than someone who's a very outgoing person. But we all thrive on relationships, very critical for our health. Anyone who lives alone really starts to develop unhealthiness. You need to have interaction with some people. So imagine if a person, and this is for serious consideration, we not only think about our relationships, like maybe once in a while you think about how's my relationship with my spouse, how's my relationship with my kids, whatever it may be, right? To also think about how is my relationship with God. And that when we pray daily, however that prayer shows up, and we actually talk to God. We have a conversation with God. We want to talk to our children from time to time. We want to speak to a spouse from time to time, wherever it may be, right? Speak to God. And now this is a real relationship in my life. Now I have a real relationship with God. God is real. I communicate. I thank God. I complain to God. I yell at God. Whatever your conversations are. It's all good. But I'm in a real relationship. Now, when I am alone, I am not lonely. By the way, there's a big distinction between alone and lonely. Alone is a physical experience. Lonely is an emotional experience. So someone can be alone, but they don't have to be lonely. Because God is always with him. So that's what he begins dealing with over here. So let's discuss this a little bit. Dealing with loneliness. And then we're going to discuss, the relationships. When someone's amongst many relationships, which I hope is the case for all of us. If he is estranged, living alone, then he should connect with God at the time of his loneliness, and he should rely on God in his state of estrangement. In order to comfort himself, he should dwell on the fact that the soul is also estranged in this world. Something I spoke about in my speech on Shabbos. Right? The soul is very lonely in this world. It's in a very foreign place. It's in this physical, earthly place. The soul is very divine and spiritual. And that all people in the world are considered as strangers in it. As the verse states, for you are strangers and temporary residents with me. So we're going to elaborate on this by going to the footnote on the bottom of page 149. The soul is also estranged in this world. The soul originates from and is part of God, and it comes down into the physical and materialistic world for a divine purpose. The soul's natural state and desire is to be connected to God, and it is therefore a stranger in this world. Now, considering that the primary and distinguishing quality of man is his soul, then each and every person is, in a certain and real sense, a stranger. Very simple. Do you know how it is when you? I just like to, you probably know by now. I like to make things very concrete. So you know how it is when you want to go to, you love some good dairy pasta. That's your favorite dinner, and your spouse loves, some meat and potatoes. You married a meat and potatoes guy, right? And now you're going out for your anniversary. You're going to the dairy restaurant. I'm assuming the restaurant is kosher, so you can only go to the dairy or to the meat. So which one are you going to? What do? So, someone's compromising here, right? But it's like, it's just it's not 100%, right? This is the story of the soul. The soul is put into a body. The body loves some good physical indulgence, like a fine restaurant. And the soul wants a divine experience, a spiritual experience. So it's captive to the body. Unless the body is willing to let the soul express itself. And that's why the soul inherently, until changes are made, is a stranger in this world. And this is true in our relationship with our soul. When I say our relationship with our soul, I mean the relationship between the body and the soul. And our true identity is our soul. That is our true identity. But we most often, do not identify with our true identity. We identify with an external identity. And that's the ego, the body, the external stuff. So the soul of man, let's continue. The soul of man is a fire of God. Just as the flame is always drawn upwards, having an innate desire to separate from the wick and ascend upwards, so too the soul of man has a desire to leave the body and reunite in its root and source the living life. God, blessed be he. The soul is incarcerated in a physical body. You know what incarcerated means? The soul is imprisoned in the body to the extent that we are identified with the body and do not let the body become a tool for the soul. By the way, if you want to do something interesting, if you're looking for some creative activities, take a candle. You can do this with someone else if you like, who's near and dear to you. Take a candle, turn off the lights in the room, and just stare at the candle, and just discuss for a few moments that the candle, the flame, is my soul. The wick and the actual candle is my body. And watch how the flame is trying to redeem itself from being attached to, anchored in the physical, and to aspire to something higher. This is a great exercise to do as we approach a new year. And then ask yourself, how am I in this new year going to give expression to that flame? And just lighten up a little bit on the body. That would do us all very good to become much more beautiful people and connected with our core identity. Just a thought. Okay, so reflect on the following. I have a soul that is literally a part of God, and my actions affect this piece of God within me. Everything I do affects my soul. Therefore, I need to have mercy on God. What does that mean, mercy on God? Mercy on my divine soul, which is a piece of God, who is in exile within my body, for the purpose that I should reunite this piece with its source through the study of Torah and fulfillment of mitzvahs. Now consider how happy you must be that you have been given this opportunity. Your task in this world to remove your soul from this exile and reunite it with God. Now consider, wow, God chose me to be able to take this piece of God and reunite it with God. For an analogy, imagine being the catalyst behind a prince who had been kidnapped and has been rotting in a jail to be reunited with his father, the king. So too should you be happy with your lot. Just think about this. Imagine that there is a prince that's imprisoned, and you have the ability to sneak the prison out of the prince out of prison and bring him to his father. Would you do it? Wow, what an opportunity that I can do this for the king, right? Think about, I don't want to, this is maybe a little bit too close to home and a little bit too painful, but imagine that we had the opportunity to redeem one of the hostages, like without hesitation, right? And in the spiritual sense, our soul is a hostage to our body. And we have the opportunity every single day to redeem it more and more. And that's by reconnecting it to what it desires, and that is being in a genuine relationship with God. Okay, everyone, we will stop here for today. I do want to mention, if I'm not mistaken, there is no class next Monday. So please note that, and I will, God willing, send out an email to remind you. But we will have a class in 2 weeks and in 3 weeks. Okay? So that is, if you're a calendar person, we're going to have our next class on the 30th, and then the next class on the 7th. Okay, then we're going to break for Sukkot, and then we will resume after that. Okay? Have a wonderful day, everyone, and we'll see you all next week, God willing.